Hi, I'm Matt Inchinthron with Couchbase, Senior Director in Engineering. I focus on SDKs and connectors as well as cloud native engineering. And with me today is John Klingen, Senior Principal Product Manager with Red Hat. And we're going to talk a little bit about Supersonic, Subatomic, Quarkus with Couchbase. So we'll talk a little bit about what a cloud native database is and what cloud native is. Then we'll talk about Quarkus. Then we'll focus a little bit on developer agility and give you a sense of how you can get started with Quarkus and Couchbase as well with some next steps. So first, cloud native database. I did a session on cloud native at Couchbase Connect in 2020. I'd encourage you to go back and look at that one. I'm pretty happy about how that worked out. And I go through a lot of detail on what cloud native is. But today I'm just going to focus on one little piece. So you'll frequently hear the term cloud native, and we talk about Couchbase as a cloud native database, and we have a cloud native set of tools to make Couchbase work very well in a cloud native environment. What is cloud native? Cloud native is really kind of a paradigm shift to software development where you're using cloud computing and you're using things like containers and microservices and serverless functions. And you're really describing your infrastructure as code. And this has been a shift in the for developers overall, and Quarkus is actually one of those pieces. So where Couchbase does a fair amount of work to make sure that we have deployment to OpenShift and Kubernetes with operators for being able to run on containers and run with infrastructure underneath for storage, Quarkus does the same sort of thing for your application. It focuses on how quickly it can get things started and running. So that's what we think is really cool about this big shift in software development, is that you can actually develop in a cloud native way. So just to go one level deeper on that, what do I mean? Historically, when you did software development, you would kind of think about things as being imperative, right? You'd go file a ticket to get some systems created. You have to wait for the sysadmins to go buy some hardware, put it in a rack, all that fun stuff. And then a couple weeks later, you get access, hopefully, to your systems. Now you got to go do the same thing to get it all wired up, get the DBA team involved. Then you have to finally develop your software, check it out, throw it over the wall to the ops team, ask them to deploy it. That's how you would do things imperatively, right? So that's where you would imperatively describe deploying an app. But in this cloud native world, you can do things declaratively. You can say, I have a set of containers. I want to run these containers. Here's the configuration that backs these containers. So in the Couchbase case, there's a cluster. There are buckets in the cluster. There are users. They have this level of access control. Then there's an application, and this app uses the cluster and defines a service that can be accessible outside the cluster, say in OpenShift or Kubernetes. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about cloud native. So with that, I want to give John an opportunity to talk through Quarkus and give you an overview of how the application side meets this cloud native deployment approach.
Hey, thanks, Matt. All right, so I thought I'd begin by giving you a bit of an introduction to what Quarkus is at a very high level, because we don't really have a whole lot of time today. Quarkus is a Java single application stack, a lot like a Drop Wizard, a Thorntail, a Spring Boot, and it brings the productivity of Node.js, or any dynamic language for that matter, and the efficiency of Golang and compiled languages. It brings those to Java developers. Right, and what I'll be showing you that today in a demo, but I kind of wanted to go over some of the key highlights of Quarkus itself. Okay, containers first, and I won't talk a whole lot about this, but basically this is kind of what people know Quarkus for. It's the fact that it can be compiled down to a native binary. You can take a Java application and an enterprise service and compile it down to a native binary. So what that basically means is that your application can start not in seconds, but in tens of milliseconds. And instead of taking hundreds of megabytes or gigabytes of RAM, your Java enterprise application can now take just tens of megabytes of RAM. And what that really does is allow you to run a lot more Java services in the same amount of RAM. And so you get very high density, very efficient use of your Kubernetes clusters, or if you're in the cloud, you can run them in the smaller images for lower cost. Okay, so Quarkus supports best-of-breed standards and libraries. So you might be asking yourself, do I have to learn a whole new set of APIs? And the answer is no. All right, so it supports APIs like Java EE, now Jakarta EE. It supports microprofile APIs. There's a Spring compatibility layer. So if you know Spring, you can use Spring Web, Spring Data JPA, Spring dependency injection. There's a lot of support for Spring APIs to bring you up to speed to becoming very productive with Quarkus as quickly as possible. It has very good integration with Kubernetes and the Kubernetes ecosystem of services, right? So think about distributed tracing and Jaeger and Grafana and Prometheus, et cetera, right? So support for a lot of the popular libraries out of the box with Quarkus. Another important aspect of Quarkus is that it unifies the imperative and reactive styles. And Matt talked a bit about imperative, and in the context of application development, it means that every request, like an HTTP request, happens on a thread. And you get throughput and concurrency by having multiple concurrent threads running. And that style is traditional Spring Boot and Jakarta EE, Java EE style of development. Now, Quarkus also supports reactive APIs. And slash asynchronous and reactive APIs, meaning under the hood, there is an event loop, a lot like what you have in Node.js. And what you do is you service a request in many small chunks on fewer threads, and you get concurrency and throughput using that style of processing. So what's unique about Quarkus is that you don't have to choose for your microservice or your application, one style or the other. You can mix and match both styles in the same application at the same time. Because at the end of the day, everything flows through the same underlying stack. So another important aspect of Quarkus is what we call developer joy. And instead of talking about it, this is where I'd like to actually demo Quarkus developer productivity features that we think brings joy to developers. To get started with Quarkus, you just go to code.quarkus.io and you have this website. And if you're a Spring Boot developer, this should look fairly familiar. It kind of looks like start.spring.io. It's similar in nature, but it's tailored for Quarkus. And you can see here that you've got some configurable parameters where you can enter in your Maven artifacts, your Maven dependencies. And yeah, Quarkus supports both Maven and Gradle. So we're going to go in and we're going to configure this just a little bit with the name. We're going to make the artifact name Quarkus-Couchbase-sample. Okay. And we have to pick some extensions. Now, an extension in Quarkus is basically a Maven dependency, but it has some characteristics that are specific to Quarkus. Like any extension in Quarkus can be compiled to a native binary, right, as part of your application. That is not true of all Java frameworks out there. It also can extensions integrate with the Quarkus configuration subsystem. So you can configure all of these extensions via Quarkus properties. Okay, and if you take a look, there's an awful lot of extensions, right? Everything from doing integration to web apps, database connectivity, cloud providers like AWS and Google, and databases. Yeah, well, there's quite a few. There's over 450, so there's a lot to choose from. All right, now what I'm going to do is create a REST endpoint. Now, the JAX-RS implementation, JAX-RS is a library for creating RESTful services in like microprofile and Jakarta EE. And I'm going to choose REST Easy Reactive. Right? And this basically is a JAX-RS implementation, which provides kind of the imperative programming style, but under the hood, it's actually async and reactive, right? So all HTTP requests are really managed by an event loop, kind of like Node.js, right? All right, so we're going to use REST Easy Reactive, so we get the performance benefits of reactive. Let's see here. We're going to use REST Easy Reactive Jackson, and this basically lets us marshal our Java objects to JSON to return values as JSON at a RESTful endpoint. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you something very briefly. Kubernetes support in Quarkus. There's quite a bit of Kubernetes support. And if you select the Kubernetes extension, it will generate Kubernetes deployment YAML for you. So you don't have to write a line of Kubernetes YAML if you don't want to. And all of this can be configured with Java properties as well. So if you don't want to write YAML, you just want to configure stuff all in one place under with your application and your application.properties file, you can do that. Okay, we're also going to tailor the YAML for OpenShift. Right? You could also tailor it for Minikube if we want. And let's see here, that gives us 4 extensions. And you'll notice that 2 of these have code next to them. So that means that sample code will be generated along with the project. Okay, and we could download this as a zip file, or we can push it to GitHub. I am going to push this project to GitHub so that you can actually clone it later and play with it yourself. So after this is over, I will actually commit the changes. So we can copy that git command line. Let's see here. Is it this way? Here we go. We're going to go ahead and clone the repo locally. Remove -rf Quarkus. I'm kind of busted because I did try this beforehand. And there we go. Now let's cd into the directory, and I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code. There are Quarkus plugins for all the major IDEs like IntelliJ, Visual Studio Code, the Eclipse IDEs, and they allow you to do things like create projects, which we did this time with code.quarkus.io. It gives you code completion and features like that. All right? Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a terminal window. I'll do it right here in the IDE, and I will run the Quarkus command line tool. So this is new in Quarkus 2, where I'm going to go ahead and just get the list of commands. I can create an app, again, yet another way of creating an app. I can build my application. I can start Quarkus in developer mode. I can add and remove extensions to my project using a command line instead of editing it directly if I want to. All right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Quarkus dev. This will start Quarkus in developer mode. While that's booting up, I am going to bring up the Java code. So this is the generated Java code. Basically, at the hello endpoint, it's going to return hello rest easy reactive. So this is basically JAX-RS annotations. If you're a Spring developer, very similar to Spring in approach. And also notice that a test was also created. Okay. All right, with this up and running, I'm going to take a look here. Notice a couple of things. First of all, it started in about 3.2 seconds. Normally, developer mode takes 2 to 3 seconds to boot up. And notice this is in developer mode. If you were to package this as an Uber jar and run it, it'll start in like well under a second. Okay. And live coding is activated. So live coding in Quarkus brings the feature that a lot of dynamic languages have, right? Where you can just edit the code and just rapidly try it out, rapidly iterate ideas. And you could do that with Quarkus too with live coding. So what we have here is, I'm going to make a change from hello rest easy reactive to hello Couchbase connect. Right? I'm going to save the file. I'm going to open up a new terminal window. I'm going to move this kind of out of the way. Curl the endpoint. Hello, and you'll see that the change was made, right? Actually, I haven't even tried the first one first. Let's go off and add a couple of exclamation points. Curl the endpoint, and you'll see that we have the exclamation points. So typically, just live reloading, you can see here, takes under a second. Right, so you can actually make changes, and before you can even refresh the browser, the update's been made. Okay. Now, what's really cool too is I can run tests, do continuous testing using this. So you can see here that it says press R to resume testing. So when Quarkus comes up, continuous testing is turned off, right? But I'm going to go ahead and start it here by pressing R, and you'll see here that the test failed. And it failed because the test is looking for hello rest easy reactive, but we changed it to hello Couchbase Connect with 2 exclamation points. So let me go in here and change this to Couchbase, spelled correctly, Connect with 2 exclamation points. Save it. Now when I save it, what you'll see here in this lower left-hand window is it's going to rerun the test. I don't have to do anything. So what's really nice about this is I'm running tests, I'm changing code, all I do is save the file, and I always know the status of my latest updates, right? And how the tests run against those updates. Okay, so that shows a continuous testing feature. Let's see, I think I am going to bring up the developer UI next. So what I did, sorry about that, is I'll bring up help. There's some really nice features here with Quarkus in developer mode. One of them is to open up the dev UI, which I just did by pressing the letter D. And you'll notice that I can also cycle through log levels, right? So if I hit the J key multiple times, it'll toggle between info, debug, and trace. So I don't have to restart my application. I don't have to do any extra work, set any, environmental variables or system properties. I just press J, right? Really productive and helpful. Now, if I go back to the dev UI, what you'll notice is that I can go in and look at the configuration of my application. And if I make changes, these changes will actually sync with the application properties file, which I'll show you here in just a second. Right? I can also look at all of my discovered beans. I can build a container image of this application I've got so far. In fact, I can even deploy it to Kubernetes or OpenShift in this case. So I got quite a bit of functionality in this dev UI. Now, as you add extensions, what you'll see here is the number of panels will actually increase to match the number of extensions. And, if I ever have questions, I can just open up the actual developer guide as well. Okay. All right, I'm going to close that, come back to the code. Now let's start adding code for Couchbase connectivity. What I'm going to do first, I think, is open up a property file. Now to speed things up, I am going to, here we go, use code snippets. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm configuring these codes with this code snippet, the connection string, just localhost, and then the username and the password. And I have running in Docker here, Docker desktop. I did a pull of Couchbase from Docker Hub, and I loaded up the travel database, the travel sample that's provided by Couchbase. And you'll see here that it's basically select from the travel sample database all hotels named Marriott in the United States, right? So that's the query string. Now let's go to the palm.xml file. Because the the Couchbase extension is still under development, it's not yet in our registry, in any Quarkus registry. So we're going to add the dependency manually. And again, I'm going to do this via a code snippet. I'm going to format this. And you'll see the extension is Quarkus-Couchbase, and it's currently an alpha snapshot version. Okay, so we're going to be using this. So a couple of things happened here as soon as I hit save. First of all, the IDE wants to update so it can get command line completion, code completion and everything. But Quarkus also restarted with these POM updates. So what's really nice, again, I never had to stop Quarkus and restart it when things change. Not only does it live reload on code changes, it also live reloads on pom.xml changes. So that's a really nice feature. Okay, now I'm going to do, I am going to actually add a JAX-RS endpoint for the travel to return the results of that query. So travel resource.java is the name of the file. Okay. Let me delete this again, another code snippet. I'm going to format this here real quick. All right, so what you'll see here is, I'm going to comment out roles aloud I'll explain that a little bit later. At the travel endpoint here, we are going to return the list of hotels. So to do that, we have to inject a reference to the Couchbase cluster. We're going to inject the query string. And then basically we're going to perform the query against that cluster. And we are then going to go through the result documents and getting all of the Marriott hotel names, right? Add it to the list of hotels and return that list. Now, it's kind of funny that I really should have been using the Reactive API for this query, but I kind of already gotten too far along for this demo, so I apologize. But Couchbase also has a Reactive API, so we could have done Reactive end-to-end as a part of this sample code. All right, so we've made our change. I think we are okay to go. What I'm going to do here is go over. Let's curl the endpoint. Again, we're going to do travel. All right, so it is now going to query the database and return back the list of hotels. So it queried Couchbase for the documents. We added the dependency. We've been modifying code. We've been testing code this entire time, and I never had to restart Quarkus once. So what we're finding is that developers find this really helpful because they can actually, they have extra time, I guess you might say, to try things out they couldn't try before. What if scenarios, because they've become so productive with Java using Quarkus, live reloading, continuous testing, etc. Right. Now, the last thing I'll talk about, but I won't show, is something called dev services. Now, in dev services with Quarkus, for frameworks that are essentially client frameworks, like database clients or cache clients, the equivalent service, the backend service for those clients, with Quarkus can be started automatically. So what we're working with Couchbase on is enabling Couchbase as a dev service. What this means is that you would be able to create the sample application using code.quarkus.io, write this travel class, and simply curl the endpoint, and it would come up with results. So that means that there would be no configuration on behalf of the developer, right? You wouldn't have had to pull Quarkus into your Docker container, because behind the scenes this uses test containers, by the way, this feature. Quarkus would do that for you. You wouldn't have to configure Quarkus to talk to Couchbase, because that would be done for you. So out of the box, you get this super fast experience for programming against backend services. What I think I'm going to do, it was kind of hinted at with this line right here, is I was going to add an OpenID Connect extension that basically boots up Keycloak automatically with no configuration. You can go in, copy the token, and then in the command line, in your curl command line, paste, do a curl. I'll just show you a very quick example here. Again, I won't have time to actually show you. Make a curl command such as this, pass in the token via an authorization header in your HTTP request, and access that resource, right? So it's super productive with dev services, because there's zero code. You just start writing your application, and all the backend services just get booted up with test containers. Okay, that's all I have, I think, for the demo. And I'll chat a little bit more here about Quarkus. To learn a little bit more about Quarkus in a more hands-on manner, take a look at, go to quarkus.io/books, and you'll see that there's a book there. If you're a Spring developer, there's an entire book dedicated to Quarkus for Spring developers. So it kind of explains the two frameworks and how, if you're a Spring developer, you can pick up Quarkus and use Quarkus. It doesn't really use the compatibility APIs that I mentioned, but it does kind of explain the Quarkus ecosystem for Spring developers. The other book is a book that I am co-author of. It is Kubernetes Native Microservices with Quarkus and Microprofile. So this book is more of a hands-on style book where you could read the book, actually flow through the examples as you read the book. It talks about Quarkus, obviously microprofile and microservices, and it's all in the context of Kubernetes. So at the end of every chapter, you can take the application, deploy it to Minikube is what the book uses, right? So you can see it all running in the context of Kubernetes. All right, now Quarkus is a supported product at Red Hat, and it's under the name of Red Hat Build of Quarkus. And what many of you may not know is, if you're a Red Hat Enterprise Linux customer or an OpenShift customer, you already have support for Quarkus. It is an entitlement for customers of these products. Or if you are not a Red Hat Enterprise Linux or Red Hat OpenShift customer, then you can get support for Quarkus through a product called Red Hat Runtimes. Okay, so it is supported. It's been supported for a long time, and it also supports native compilation and running in native mode. Okay, I think that's it. Back to you, Matt.
Great. So now what I want to talk to you just a little bit about is developer agility when you're using Quarkus and Couchbase. If you think about it, you really have developer agility on multiple fronts. So one is that Couchbase itself is a distributed database for modern applications. It's a document database. It stores things in JSON. And so what that means is at the application level, when you build your object model, that just translates very naturally into these JSON documents that you're storing. You don't have to go through database migrations or the kind of normalization or object relational mappers that you're used to from, say, the relational database world. But we also have, while we store data as JSON, Couchbase has things like query over JSON with Nickel. Nickel is a query language that it supports a superset of SQL. So it is SQL with some more features for being able to do things like nest and unnest documents together as needed. And it has the full set of capabilities that you might need, say things like joins, to be able to join multiple documents together. So there's a lot more detail there in other sessions, but I just want to give you that sense that at that modern application level, you're actually able to, you have agility there. And I'm going to show a demonstration of that in a moment. Also, Couchbase is built for the cloud. You can develop locally, or you can develop and deploy on public cloud. We have a number of users who will have their OpenShift environment or a public cloud environment where developers actually at development time are deploying to cloud for development and test. And of course, you have hybrid cloud options. You may have situations where maybe there's some data that's sensitive that needs to live within your data center, and you hide it behind a microservice in your data center, and then you have the ability to scale using a public cloud. So you have that ability too. And Couchbase has been working with Red Hat for a while on the Red Hat Marketplace, where of course another public marketplaces and public clouds as well. But Red Hat's been a great partner to us in helping our users deploy to OpenShift, whether locally or on Red Hat Marketplace. So let me get into a little bit of a demonstration. Just to set this up for a moment, imagine the same travel database that John was using earlier, but a slightly different aspect of it. Imagine you have a scope that has, in Couchbase nomenclature, scope is kind of analogous to a schema. It's a set of data. And then you have a set of collections within that scope. And the inventory collection, say your boss comes down the hall and says, the travel inventory collection was just updated with vacancy information. How quickly can we get that into the public API? So there are third parties and application, mobile teams and so forth that want to be able to get that information. Suddenly we have this new data feed since we have hotels that are coming in from a third party. How do we get that really quickly into the public API? This will give me an opportunity to show how we would do that with Quarkus. So what I have here is in my IDE, I have a similar version of the application that John was running earlier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start up Quarkus in dev mode here. So once I start Quarkus in dev mode, as we talked about a little earlier, one of the cool things is Quarkus has this ability to do live code reload, right? So I'm going to just start up, I'm a developer, I'm just going to start it up locally. Okay, it takes a few seconds to get going, 12 seconds. But now that it's up and running, here's the cool part. So I'm going to, I have my Couchbase here locally. I'm going to have a look at the bucket and see the boss said they want they want to be able to add inventory. So I'm going to go have a look. Okay, in a query, there's this section where we do schema inference. And you can see that in the inventory scope, there is a hotel collection. And if I have a look at that, see, I'm looking for inventory, or I'm sorry, I'm looking for vacancy rather. So there's vacancy, it's a Boolean. Let's see, so if I do, there's this endpoint that I use for testing, travel, Marriott's. If I load that right now, it doesn't have vacancy information. So I got to add vacancy information. So let's pop back over here. Let's see, this is a hotel object. Oh, good, there's a model for hotels. Let's see if I add public Boolean vacancy. Okay, done. Okay, and now if I, since Quarkus is still running the loaded application, I should be able to just reload the API and hey, there you go, vacancy. So these hotels have vacancy. Okay, boss, that's how long it took to actually make the change. Okay, but now we still got to get it in production. So in order to get it in production, I need to turn it into a Docker container and get it over to the live site. So let's see, how do we do that? I think what I need to do is pop back over here. And if I recall correctly, what I need to do, oh, we got to do one thing first. You know, we changed the application, so now we got to change the version. So if I were to go to the pom.xml, we were on version 100. We got to go to version 101. Okay, did that. And now I want to build the image. So Quarkus ships with a Maven target for building the image. There are a variety of different versions of that. But this should be super quick because I've already tested it and so forth locally. I probably should be testing it a little more, but we already have all the layers in there. So as soon as we get it built, we already did all those layers before. We have our new layer. And now we're done. Okay, so it took 18 seconds to build it. And now I want to push it to Docker. So I'm going to Docker push ingnthr. That's my account. And then I'm going to push connect on 1.0.1. So now we got to push that to Docker since we already did all the previous layers. And Quarkus makes things really nice and small. You can see it was super quick to push it. Okay, that's pushed now. So that's up on Docker Hub. I also could have put it in my key.io or Red Hat container registry, depending on what it is. So now let's go look at production. Okay, over in production, we have currently running, let's see, we have a deployment. We have travel app. That's the one I deployed earlier. Let's see, and it's using 100. So in order to update that for production, I think I need to do one other thing over here. I need to go open the YAML that backs the travel app, and I need to change it to 101. Normally, I'd send this to the ops people to have them deploy it to production, but we're in a hurry here. So now that that's done, all I need to do is go and then apply it. So if I do an OC, which is the tool for OpenShift, apply -f, oops, if I could type, -f travel app.yaml, what we should see happen is it should come back and tell us that it's configured that resource in OpenShift. By the way, while that's running here, okay, there you go, it's configured. Now this is the OpenShift platform, so we're able to see, this is the UI for OpenShift, so you're able to see the container deployment. So this container, this travel app that we deployed is built, this uses, oh, it's already deployed. Okay, you missed the deploy, sorry. So this is, just it's using that Quarkus app that we built. And since Quarkus starts up so quickly, it was just the amount of time to pull that layer and then restart it because we changed the deployment details. Of course, you can see the background behind the YAML if you need to, or you could even see what's happening in the environment. If we were to want to go look at an individual pod, or even see, say, what's happening on the screen of the pod as an example. But I'm just going to pop back to my deployment, partially because I can just show you with, now that I have this in OpenShift, let's start a couple more versions of it. So we'll scale it up to 4, and what if I needed to, dynamically have some more capacity because I'm anticipating a workload spike, because now we have this fancy new vacancy feature that I'm able to spin that up really quickly. And so you see that additional containers spin up, and the service is available immediately to users. So that was just a quick demonstration of how we took that application, the developer agility, right? I had my object model. I added very briefly a new field. I created a new container. I deployed it to my container registry, and then I pulled it into an OpenShift deployment super quickly. And because it's all built on top of Quarkus with Couchbase, it's able to very quickly just restart in that environment and have that new feature out. So with that, let me give you a quick sense of what you can do for some next steps. So next steps would be, you can, if you want to get started today, Quarkus Couchbase is one of the extensions up on Quarkus.io, or you may want to, if you're wanting to work with the bleeding edge, speaking as of today, that's the best place to get it. But by the time you see this presentation, it's probably going to be updated a little more. All you have to do is clone it. Locally, you'll Maven install it. And then to run Couchbase itself, like John was, you just Docker run Couchbase itself, and then go to code.quarkus.io. You'll add the Couchbase extension locally, and then you're good to go. Store, retrieve, and search data in Couchbase. We will also have a repository that shows what we were using here. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on forums.couchbase.com. So with that, the code is up on the code that John demonstrated is up on Quarkus Couchbase sample. That's the one that was built live. And Couchbase Quarkus is there if you're interested in more detail and contributing. So on behalf of myself and John, I want to thank you very much for attending this session, and look forward to talking to you at the rest of Connect. Thanks.